Parshas Chaye Sora. The share has been kindly sponsored anonymously. May the words of Torah learned be a schus for the Navdan and his family. If you'd like to sponsor any future shiurim, please be in touch. Okay. The Parshas Chaye Sora is the Parsha of Shiduchim. It's the Parsha from which one can draw a tremendous amount and tremendous wealth of wisdom. But it's not limited to the topic of Shiduchim. But obviously that's the subject matter of the Parsha. Why is that the subject matter? Because Avram sends Eliezer on a mission to find a wife for his son Yitzchak. That's the theme, at least part of the Parsha. I'm going to begin with two questions on this story. We'd imagine if Avram Avinu is trying to find a wife for his son, he would be pretty specific about it. What he wants for his son. Talking about the next part of the chain, future of Klal Yisrael, mother of Klal Yisrael, right, of the generations that were coming. And yet, what does Avram Avinu say? He says one specific criteria, that's it. He says, make sure that she's not from Benois Canaan. It has to be that you take a daughter-in-law, you take a person from my extended family, says Avram Avinu, not from Canaan. That's all he says. So the question is, why does Avram Avinu not give more specific instructions to Eliezer? That's the question. Why does he not create more of a criteria as to who should come into his family? Okay, that's question number one. Question number two is, how come Eliezer made up his own criteria? We all know the story of the Torah. Eliezer set out on a mission. Yes, he had tremendous kefitas aderech. It went fast for him. Great miracle, very nice. Turns up at the well, and he turns to Hashem with tefillah, and he makes this whole test. If she's going to be a balas chesed, and she's going to start feeding my camels, and all the rest of it. Eliezer was an Eved Avram. He was a servant. He was a slave. This is not someone who's in character of adding things of his own opinion. So what's this business about Eliezer adding on to what Avram said? Avram said one criteria: go find me a girl for my family. That's all he said. So why is Eliezer adding on? Okay. So firstly, we must mention this. We mentioned this last year as well. It's the only pshat that there is, as far as I can tell. Why Avram Avinu looked for his own family. There was a reason. There's a logic to it. And Reb Eli Lapian speaks it out in his Sefer, but the truth is it's also quite clear in Droshas Haran, in Drosh Chamishi as well. And Reb Eli explains that actually, on balance, Middos Rois, bad character traits, is far worse than the lack of Yiras Shamayim. In other words, if you have two options in front of you, you have someone who's somewhat shaky in their Yiddishkeit, somewhat shaky in their Emuna, but their Middos are pristine, then Middos is always trumps Yiras Shamayim, always trumps Emuna. Why is that the case? And he says because Middos are fundamental. Middos are the framework of a person. And that is very, very difficult to change. It's a life's work for a person to improve their character, and one should try. But ultimately it's a life's work. Matters of Emuna, matters of Yiras Shamayim, that's subject to change all the time. People sometimes go through periods of time where they're not that strong in their Emuna, but then they become strong in their Emuna. That's not, so to speak, a big deal. And he says an important thing. The house of Besuel and Lovon was not the best house. They were over Avodah Zarah. So their Emuna was clearly lacking. But they did not suffer from the same problem that anyone from Canaan would suffer from. And what is that problem? The very fact that you're of the lineage of Canaan means you're carrying with you the bad character traits that dates back from Canaan. The person Canaan, the son of Noach, who was a terrible person, a wicked person, did wicked things. He had bad character traits that went down generation after generation after generation, and therefore that completely disqualified anyone from Canaan from being taken. So Avram Avinu looked for a daughter who did not suffer from being of the lineage of Canaan, which means, in other words, who did not carry the same genealogy as Canaan, who did not have the same Middos Rois that Canaan would have. That way he was safe in that regard. He preferred taking someone even from a house of Avodah Zarah, as long as they didn't have the bad character traits. That is the simple understanding which Reb Eli Lapian speaks out, and as I say, others too. But here's the problem that requires more explanation. Because if it's simply to be understood as simply as that, then there's really no need for Eliezer. I know we've asked this question before, but we're going to ask it differently now. There's no need for Eliezer to come up with any stipulations of his own about chesed, about any Middos Tovos, we don't care. We care about one thing. Don't be from the daughters of Canaan. Because if you're from daughters of Canaan, you carry bad character traits. Fine. So as long as that's fulfilled, why does anything else matter? Why do we even give the time of day to Eliezer's tefillah, to Eliezer's tests, which is trying to suss out, is she of the right character? Who cares for the right character? As long as you're in line, as long as you're in the right genealogy, then you're okay. Surely that should be sufficient. And it's clearly not sufficient. And the second question is turning the whole thing on its head. Rabbi Eli Lapin speaks out that Middos go down generation after generation. Really? Do you see who Rivka's father is? Do you see what a so-and-so Basula was? Well, how come she get off scot-free? How come there was such a thing as a Rivka? How could Rivka be so righteous and be such a balas chesed in the home of wicked Middos? True, it didn't date back quite as far as Canaan's problems did, but she still came from a home of rotten Middos. So how come that didn't impact her, and how was she able to pull through? As a kid. So we have to really try and take a moment to understand, what does this mean that Middos go down genetically? And the truth is, we're all part of it. Because the Gemara in Yevamos Ayin Tes says, Shloisha simonim yesh be'umazu, rachmonim ba'ishonim goim lechasodim. There are 3 character traits that you can identify a person by. These character traits, if they have them, they're part of the Jewish people. People are rachmonim and merciful, ba'ishonim, and bashful, and nivos, and goim lechasodim, people of kindness. So what? That means every single Jew is of these 3 traits? I mean, I can think of a fair few that questionable. Should I be questioning their heritage? What does it mean? So there's a number, I went into this quite a bit, but we don't have the time to mention all the different rise. So I'll mention the main one, which is the Rambam. I'm going to read out. The Rambam clearly explains that even though there's such a thing called nature, there is such a thing called genes, there's such a thing called middos that one has inbuilt, that does not take away from the fact that 100% there is free will with this as well. So in spite of, or despite one's middos, there is a huge amount of freedom and free will that a person has with how they behave and how they become and how they develop. So the Rambam in Hilchos Tshuva Perek Hey, he says, don't think for a second, comes from the Gemara, don't think for a second that Hashem has already decided from the beginning of a person's birth that they are going to be a tzaddik or rasha. Ein adav okay. Ela kol adam roi lo is tzaddik Moshe Rabbeinu or rasha ki Yeravam ben rasha ki Yeravam. The Rambam writes that a person can be a tzaddik like Moshe Rabbeinu or rasha Yeravam. There's nothing set in stone. But he continues, oy chacham oy sachal, a person can turn out to be wise or foolish, and then he continues, oy rachman oy achzori, or merciful or mean, wicked. V'chein shar kol hadeos, and so it is with all other deos. When the Rambam uses the word deos, it's famous. The Rambam means middos. So the Rambam is saying that every single person has the potential within them to be whatever, whoever they want to be, whether that's righteous or wicked. But it also extends to middos. And he continues with a proof, a logical imperative. It's got to be the case that we're not forced to be a certain way. Because if it was the case that Hashem set us up a certain way, then how can it be, how can it be that the Nevi'im can come along and say, behave like this, don't do that, hey, tivu darchechem, improve your ways, don't go after your wicked ways. What do you mean, says the Rambam? It's already been established from his from get-go what he was going to be like and what he was going to turn out to be, says the Rambam. So it doesn't make sense to say that we're set in stone based on our character. Clearly he's talking about character. Based on righteousness, nothing's set in stone. Everything's up for grabs. A person has the opportunity and the free will and the freedom to make of himself what he can in his life. The Ravid adds in a point, again, if we had more time we get into it, there's a Gemara in Shabbos that talks about the different mazolos that a person can be born under, different stars and what they mean, and a person's, has more of an angry disposition, what that means for their career choices. They can become a sheikh, they become a moil, or they become a murderer. The Gemara in Shabbos discusses this. And the Ravid says quite clearly, with all the koyach hamazolos and with all the different stuff that a person's born with, at the end of the day, hu ha-koyach hanosan b'adam liyos tov ra. A person has the ability to choose to be good or bad. Everyone has that ability. So it's absolutely clear. As I said, there's a number of riots to this. This is the main one I wanted to share with you tonight. There's a number of riots to this. It's absolutely clear. Any middah that we talk of, even though we've established, will go down generation by generation. It will be within the genealogy of a person. It's true. Middas do go down. People have different characters. You can sometimes tell a person's mannerisms or a person's behavior from observing them and saying they're similar to their father, grandfather, whatever it is. That's absolutely normal. It's true, but it doesn't mean that a person is now subject to that behavior, whatever happens. A person's not locked in. A person has tremendous amounts of freedom and free will to decide what they make of it and what they do with their life and who they become. A person should never feel that they are someone because they have to be that person because that's their character till now, or because that's what their father was like, or because that's what they've always thought themselves to be. The world's your oyster. Go make of it what you can. One point though is important to make. For whatever reason, Canaan are not in this category. For whatever reason, Canaan, the level of wickedness of Canaan, the level of Middos Rois that they carried was of such a degree, we're not taking any chances with them. We're not going to leave it down to the individual to make of himself something better. If you're part of Canaan, you're irredeemable. That seems to be the exception to the rule. But in terms of, for example, Avram Avinu's relatives, as a family unit, Besuel wasn't a good guy. Lavan, trickster. But that didn't mean that there couldn't be a righteous person growing up under their gaze in their house and yet growing up differently. And this, I feel, is the first incredible thing that we're sharing together tonight. The first incredible insight into Rivka, into the story over here. You see a little girl, whether she was 3, whether she was older, doesn't matter for this point. Rashi, the beginning of Toldos, Perek Chafei, Pasuk Chaf. The Pasuk speaks out that Rivka came from Bas Besuel. Says Rashi, Lahagit Shvach, the point the Pasuk wants to emphasize is to talk to her praise. Shahoita Bas Rasha, Va'achos Rasha, she was a daughter of a Rasha, she was a brother of a Rasha. Umakoima Anshe Rasha, the place that she lived in was a terrible, wicked place. Veloy Lomdo Mima Seyem, and she did not learn from their wicked ways. She made an active choice with her free will to rise above what was around her in her natural surroundings, home-wise, city-wise, Kehillah-wise. It doesn't make a difference. Nothing influenced her. She was able to chart her own path. Incredible gevura, incredible strength. And the Gur Aryeh points out with the wording and explains that don't think for a second that maybe she was still a young girl, so what does she know? She didn't pick anything up. She didn't realize the wicked nature of the people around her. So big deal, she turned out to be a tzaddikus. Wow. She was a little kid, she didn't know anything. Says Gur Aryeh, that's the wrong way to read what's going on here. She had the ability to learn from the people around her. She could have turned out in the natural way that the people around her were behaving, and she went against the trend to choose her own way. And further he explains how the people around her, the Minhag Ha'ir, Kulam Rishayim, she was entirely surrounded by wicked people. And this shows you, says the Gur Aryeh in the Rashi, Al Goydel Tzidkosa V'Zachris Nafsha. You see the beauty, the purity, the tzidkas, the gadlus of Rivka as a girl, that she chose her unique path. So yes, going back to the first point, Rabbi Eli Lapion's explanation, as I say, Drosh Zoran, Middas are genetic. We want to avoid Canaan like the plague. We don't want to have anything to do with their genes. But at the same time, there's huge amounts of free will, and that explains how Rivka came to be. In spite of her own home background, in spite of her surroundings, in spite of the kehillah she was brought up in, and the wickedness that surrounded her, she was able to see the truth of what it is. She was able to seek a different path. So this really answers our first question, why Avram Avinu, well, it partly answers it, why Avram Avinu was looking for a daughter-in-law from his own family, and that was his main criteria, because that's what he was focused on. He wanted to find someone who didn't carry the genealogy of Canaan. But let's talk for a few minutes about Eliezer. I have for you what I consider, what we say in Yiddish, a bomba kasha. It is a very explosive question that I have seen none of the Mefarshim deal with. So either I'm making a massive mistake, or I've discovered something new. I don't know. probably made a mistake. But if you have any information about this, or you discover anything, or you hear anyone else talk about it, please let me know. In Parshas Chaye Sora, last week's Sefer, this may have slipped you. After the Akedah, the Pasuk says the following. Perek Chof Beis Pasuk Chav. Vayhi acharei advarim ha'ela v'yugad l'Avram hinei yolda Milka gam hi bonim leNachor achicha. Avram Avinu was told that Milka had children to Nachor, his brother. Says Rashi. When Avram Avinu came back from Har Moriah, from having the whole Akedah thing, he started thinking about Shiduchim. You know, if my son was shechted, I wouldn't have any children. You know, I think I should start sorting out a shidduch. By the way, this is in Midrashim. I've checked loads of Midrashim on the same thing. This is all over Midrash. Bisroi HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu informs Avram Avinu of the news. Shenolda Rivka Bas Zugoi. That Rivka, his Zivug, had been born. So in last week's Sedra, following the Akedah, Avram Avinu gets a news flash from above. The shidduch for your son has been found. She's just been born. She's called Rivka. So you mean to tell me that Avram Avinu knew who the shidduch of Yitzchak was going to be? And he sent Eliezer on a mission blind? Why? Why would he do that? We'd have a much shorter Sedra. Laning would be half the size. Imagine Chaye Sora cut out the first half. Avram Avinu tells Eliezer, hey, I had a dream. Hashem came to me. Rivka, just go check her out. Off you go. What's this whole spiel? It's a pele. It's mamash a pele. Avram Avinu knew the future zivug of Yitzchak. Why didn't he tell Eliezer? So I don't have a direct teretz because, as I say, I haven't found anyone who discusses it. But I'm going to borrow Orach Chaim. I'm going to borrow an idea of Orach Chaim. And I say borrow because Orach Chaim clearly seems not to learn. I don't know what Orach Chaim learns. He's not directly addressing this question, okay? But I'm borrowing the thing that he says for the answer to this question. And he says an unbelievable thing. Orach Chaim says, Avram Avinu knew his relatives very well. And he knew who he was dealing with. Just imagine. And we know them, right, from the stories that we know about them. Just imagine Eliezer is told by Avram Avinu, there's Rivka, Bas, Besuel, go check her out. He turns up in the town. What's his first question when he turns up there? Tell me, anyone know where Besuel lives? Yeah, over there. Very good. Goes over to Besuel, knocks on the door. And he goes to Besuel, tell me, you have a daughter called Rivka? Yeah, I've got a daughter. Why do you need to know? Oh, Avram sent me on a mission for a shidduch. Oh, yeah, 1 second. Who do you think they're going to bring to the front door? You really think they're going to bring Rivka? Ah, stupid. They'll go to the marketplace, grab a girl, bring it forward and say, yeah, it's our daughter Rivka. Eliezer will be none the wiser, and he'd run back to Avram with the wrong girl. This way, Avram didn't say a word. Avram didn't say a word. He just said to Eliezer, take a girl from my family, Hu yishlach malochoi lefanecha v'lokachta isha livni misham. Hashem will send you the right messenger. Hashem will sort it out. You will find the right zivug that I need. But I'm not giving you any more details. Now Eliezer turns up. He does his whole spiel. How does he discover who Rivka really was? Rivka volunteered the information. There was no setup. It wasn't that there was a reason for Rivka to deceive anyone. They had this conversation, and in the conversation he said, oh, by the way, who are you? Oh, yeah, I'm the daughter of Saul. Okay, very good. So he knew he could rely on that. He knew there was a reliability there. So it's incredible. So far what we're laying down over here is Avram Avinu knew Rivka in advance was the right shidduch for Yitzchak, and yet held that information back purposely so that Eliezer would have a fair chance at discovering the genuine Rivka. That seems to be, I think it's reasonable. So now think of it from Eliezer's terms. Eliezer's not aware that Avram knows. So Eliezer's been sent on a mission blind, and Eliezer is feeling somewhat at loss. I mean, just imagine the enormity of the task at hand. He's been tasked with finding the right shidduch for Yitzchak, and he's not been given any instruction much. He's been told, from my family, and that's about it. So Eliezer's in a bit of a pickle. He needs a bit of help. So he was a good person. Eliezer was someone very choshev. What does a person do who's a good ehrliche person? They turn to the Rebbeinu Shlomo. So Eliezer turns to Hashem in all innocence and says to Hashem, please help me. Now I'm going to tell you Meshech Chochma that is going to take this parasha and is going to turn it on its head. I really hope it does. Because if you look at this parasha kipshuto, and we've not said anything against this till now, if you look at this parasha simply speaking, what is the enormity of what happened? What is the unbelievable chain of events that one can walk away from? Eliezer turns up in this situation, he doesn't know what's going to be, he's a bit at loss, he davens to Hashem, he sets up a test, and lo and behold, Rivka turns up. Wow! Isn't that incredible? Rivka turns up just like that. The test, she passes, great. And the shidduch is just dead miraculous. This is unbelievable. Eliezer had the right tefillah. Outcome of his tefillah was Rivka coming, and all worked out. It's amazing, right? The Meshech Chochma in Posuk Tesvav. Now, I don't know Dikduk, but the Meshech Chochma points out that the Lashon HaPosuk is, after Eliezer finished davening, it says, Vayehi hu terem kilo ledaber. Now, translating is, and it was when he finished speaking. But the Meshech Chochma says, actually, it should be, Vayiyeh terem kilo hu ledaber. Okay? I accept the Meshech Chochma's point, can't argue. But what's he trying to do with all this shifting of the words? What's the key point that the Meshech Chochma is making? He said it looks like Eliezer had this great insight and worked out for himself what type of wife does Yitzchak need, fashioned this whole tefillah and this whole test, and Hashem listened to Eliezer's tefillah, and out came Rivka. Says Meshech Chochma, you've got this the whole wrong way round. Hashem decided that Rivka was the right shidduch for Yitzchak. So Hashem put the words and the idea into Eliezer's mouth and mind so that he should know what the test is, so that he should recognize Rivka as being the right zivug. It wasn't Eliezer who davened, who caused the outcome that Rivka came out and great, Eliezer's tefillah pulled it off. That was all part of the plan. But Hashem arranged for Eliezer to have this idea in the way that he did and to daven in the way that he did, so that when Rivka turns up, Eliezer would know, oh, this is the girl, because she passed my test. Turned it on its head. And he fits that into the words, as I say, so Terem Kilul Daber means it works better according to this way of thinking. That's why the Meshech Chochma says it. So it's an incredible thing, this. Now you look at the parasha again. What do you see now? Credit to Eliezer for coming up with this criteria. Credit to Eliezer for davening such a super tefillah that his tefillah was answered and therefore Rivka turns up by magic. It's the wrong way to look at it. Now, let me say very clearly, it's absolutely the right thing to do in any situation that a person is unsure that a person should daven, of course. Now, you can ask me what's the point of davening if Hashem knows anyway, and that's not the scope of this shir. But there's no question about it. Eliezer, from his own perspective, went into this innocently, was 100% right in what he did. He was stuck in a situation and he very innocently turned to Hashem and davened. That's what you should do. That's what your person should do. No question. But from our perspective, we're learning the parasha to glean from the parasha. There's a much more powerful limud there. The powerful limud is Hashem was doing all of this. He was behind the scenes. He was matching it all up to make sure that the outcome Hashem wanted came out. People sometimes daven. Unfortunately, someone's not well, and people daven and they daven and seriously and earnestly, and Baruch Hashem, the person becomes better. And COVID has happened a lot, and you see sometimes people they celebrate the fact that they became better, which is good. Yeah, of course, a person should give hodah to Hashem. But the part that I don't like is when a person takes personal credit for it. It's like, our tefillahs helped. What do you mean your tefillahs helped? What are you talking about? You did what you're supposed to do, no question. You davened, that's what you should do. And a person should daven to Hashem with all his heart, no question. But to walk off from that and say you take credit for it? What, you think you run the world? Eliezer did a fantastic tefillah. He did what was right, don't get me wrong. He should be credited for that. He should take great pleasure in him reacting to a situation in the right way. But did he achieve? He pulled it off? Hashem did it. 100% from beginning to end. And this is why the Gemara in Moed Katan happens to be from the words that Basul and Lavan said, when they said, May Hashem Yotzo Hadova, this matter, this Shidduch has come from Hashem. Even they recognized the tremendous Hashgacha from the story that Eliezer said over. They said it's from Hashem. We can see the divine design behind this. It says the Gemara Moed Cotton, Omar Rav, Mishum Rab Reuven, Ben Esruvli, Min HaTorah, Min HaNavim, Min HaKsuvim, On HaLamedin, Shem Hashem, Ish Ala Ish. Now, tell you the same Hashem Yotzo Hadova. The Ribono Shel Olam has worked this out. Right when a person is born, Hashem decides who they're going to marry, and that is it. The rest of our lives, we do what we do, and we'll do all our free will choices, and we'll do all our davening, and a person should daven. Of course a person should daven. It's important for a person to daven. But a person shouldn't think to themselves that it's dependent on them, that they somehow need to pull this off. They don't have to do anything. Hashem has worked this whole thing out. In fact, as we see from Eliezer, Hashem will even make sure that your tefillah is right according to the outcome that Hashem wants you to have. So you think when you're davening that it's all on you, that you're coming up with the words and you're thinking of this genius way of davening because you want a specific outcome. Hashem planned what Eliezer should say in order for the outcome to be achieved. That's how far Hashem is going to make sure that we live in a world where we have free will. So we live in a world where we take responsibility and we daven, but at the same time, He's helping us along the way every single step. So let's recap and finish with this. So the first question we asked was, why is Avram not giving more specific instructions to Eliezer? Well, there's a number of ways of us answering it now after all this information. But essentially, we said Avram wanted someone not from Bnei Canaan because they had bad middos. And we explained what that means. There's free will, but they still had bad middos. He wanted a person to come from his family so they shouldn't be part of Canaan. But he didn't give Eliezer any specific instructions because he didn't want to give Eliezer too much information. He didn't want to tell Eliezer. Basically, he could have told him where to go to find Rivka, but he didn't want to because he was worried about the way Basul and Lavan might react to that and defraud him. So better give him more of an opaque scenario. Just find someone from my family. Off you go. Hashem will sort you out. Hashem will sort you out. Better that way. Then we asked, how come Eliezer came up with his own criteria? On the face of it, he was a servant. He was a loyal servant. He was not exactly going to do more than the master told him to do. So we said for the Meshech Chochma, you think it was Eliezer's idea? Hashem put in Eliezer's mind this setup so that Eliezer would find Rivka and know that Rivka was the right person because Rivka was indeed destined to be the one to marry Yitzchak. So Hashem set this up. So even though the natural way of learning these psukim and reading the story of the Parsha is to walk out with incredible respect for Eliezer's davening, for the nest that happened because he davened and his tefillahs were answered and Rivka turns up at the exact right time. There's no question, as I say, give credit where credit is due, that the value of Eliezer davening in that moment should not be understated. However, I think there's a far more powerful takeaway to come away from the Parsha with, which is as much as you think when you're in a situation and you call out to Hashem and Hashem answers you, that somehow you've played a role in pulling this off, you have to recognize, May Hashem Yotzo Hadova. Hashem has worked out this world and the plans and your life, your individual life, especially when it comes to Shiduchim, but with regards to everything else as well. Hashem has worked the whole thing out. You do what you got to do, absolutely. You make the choices you got to make. But for not 1 second should you think and should you feel that somehow it rests on you. It's all Ribono Shel Olam. It's 100% Ribono Shel Olam. You play your part and Hashem will play his. Shkoyach.